Could the next witness take a place at the witness table? Okay. For the record, could you please state your name and the position you hold in your organization?
Dr. Gillian Koh of the Institute of Policy Studies, but I'm here in my personal capacity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. The evidence that you will be giving today for the committee will be taken on oath. If you desire, you can take an affirmation. Clerk, could you administer the oath, please?
Please rise. Hold the Bible in your left hand. Raise your right hand. Please recite the oath.
I, Gillian Koh, swear that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome to the public hearing on the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence-gathering session is for us to put questions to you, and you have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. I'll now call on Minister Shanmugam to ask his questions.
Thank you for this opportunity to meet with
I'm
you.
sorry. Dr. Janio, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Koh, thank you for your submission and thank you for coming before the committee. You've perhaps been following some of the submissions and representations, some of the oral discussions that we've had here.
I've tried.
Could I start by asking you whether you agree with some of the assertions that have been made by a number of people coming forward?
All right.
Beginning firstly that there is a significant effect and risk towards our national security as a result of the prevalence of disinformation campaigns. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree that there is that threat, given how it is being discussed worldwide, but also that you have had a witness, Dr. Guliza, who has said that there have been a number of occasions when Singapore has been subjected to cyber attacks in recent past, including attacks on sensitive ministries. She also added that there have been indicators of information warfare being practiced against Singapore, and it involves a state putting its perspective on the table through news articles and social media, for instance, to try and influence the minds of specific segments of the affected society. And this is to legitimize the state's action, the adversary, whoever that is, on an international sphere. What I wish there was further detail, but I believe that the threat exists, and you know, I guess it was a closed-door meeting and we're not privy to sensitive information, which I accept is, of course, reasonable.
Okay. Perhaps I can take you through, we could have a table that summarizes some of the, this would be the table on national security with the various propositions. And we could, if you don't have it in front of you, we can put it on the screen. Okay. And I just want to see whether we're on the same page. You agree about the prevalence of disinformation campaigns, that such information warfare threatens national security and sovereignty, that this has become part of an established process of the military arsenal and statecraft almost, that it's persistent, permanent, and takes place all the time in the absence of open conflict. You'd agree with all those statements?
Well, I agree with the first bits, that information warfare is out there and that there are states that are trying to take on other states and political systems that way. I don't know if it's sort of come upon us, but based on the witness's point of view, yes, it exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would also perhaps agree that it's an attractive option because the costs and manpower needed are relatively low, but the effects are highly significant and effective, partly with a result of requiring a lower need to deploy military hard power if these campaigns are effective.
Yes, Absolutely agree. And also the internet allows you to reach the hearts and minds of the citizens, for instance, if we're talking about national security, and allows you to seep through a lot of things in order to get there. Is it on an ongoing basis, again, which relates to the first set of questions? I don't know, because I don't have the evidence.
But are you willing
But
to accept
yes,
the expert evidence of the
absolutely.
various people who've come
Yes.
before this committee? Thank
Yes.
you very much.
I have to.
And would you also agree that these campaigns can be so subtle and obscure that we may not even know that we're being attacked or that they are ongoing at this time?
Yes, I accept that that is possible.
Okay. We've talked, you yourself have mentioned about how larger countries have engaged in this and potentially affecting us, and that these campaigns can have real-world consequences, that these can influence events in real time.
Yes, I haven't named any big countries or small, so I don't know, but I believe the countries do that based on what we've read elsewhere. And there are real-world effects of those instances that we have read about.
And these real-world effects, they, in terms of trying to sow discord and eroding trust between communities, groups, exploiting fractures and fault lines, result in destabilization of societies, psychological destabilization of societies.
Yes, I agree with that. And also, my real concern is the undermining of democratic institutions, and we are ourselves a democracy, yes.
And you accept, of course, that Singapore is just as vulnerable to this as any other state that has been targeted?
If not more so, there are only that many hearts and minds to sway in a small group.
Are we potentially even at a more attractive target as a result of perhaps our national factors or some of the multicultural or multi-religious diversity that we have here?
Certainly, the multiculturalism makes us vulnerable. And I think in the Green Paper, I would accept that the Ministry of Law and MCI have set out how and why we may be an attractive target for geopolitical interests and stakes. Yes.
If I could then move to some of the representations about how people process and absorb information. I think you may have been present for some of this.
Yes.
Dr. Carol Soon and her colleague, Mr. Sean Goh, you know, that people use mental shortcuts to process information, that these are not necessarily things that are taken in an entirely rational, clear-headed way. That people use mental heuristics, shortcuts, confirmation biases. There's an emotive aspect to how people process these problems.
Yes, I accept that that is at play, but I also want to say that that's the whole point of going to school and going through education and being part of a citizen of a democracy, that you beat your natural instinct and you try to respond to some of these by stopping and thinking. But yes, I agree that these are at play. Yes.
But indeed, some of those problems, there is a component which may be as a result of ignorance, a lack of awareness of the facts, which can be addressed through education. But is there not a component which is a bit more visceral? I think the point being made that some of these are neurocognitive, dependent on neurotransmitters. So even if you are aware of them, they need to be overcome rather than not being present.
Yes, they
You'd agree
need
with
to
that?
be overcome. Absolutely.
Please.
Dr. Koh,
Yes.
I think I remember asking Dr. Soon about it. I think it's reasonably clear that there is no clear evidence, one way or the other, that education necessarily helps with this heuristic factors. Would you accept that?
Yes, I would accept that. And also, because they come through a certain media, they're fast and furious, and therefore it makes it all the more challenging to overcome. Yes.
Thank you.
With respect to your last comment, Dr. Koh, you would agree then that the truth is weak and does not travel as easily as falsehoods?
Try me must to insert what is the truth, and if we have the allowance of many other thinking, learned citizens to speak up, then we must push back against the falsehoods.
That's why we are here.
Yes,
We would like to do something about this.
absolutely. Not just on the educational front, but in my submission, I do agree that something more has to be done in order to stop falsehoods or material that seeks to influence without us knowing, and therefore undermining our own practice of democracy here.
If I could take you to a summary of some of the impacts of having deliberate online falsehoods spread and spread aggressively. We've talked about how there can be real-world consequences, the impact on societies, the impact upon our security, the potential for violence. But if I could take you to perhaps the third page, you, I hope, agree and accept that the ongoing spread of deliberate online falsehoods can manipulate trust in institutions to the point where these can be eroded significantly,
Yes, I accept that.
including, for example, the police and other authority figures.
Yes.
But further, this spreading misinformation, if it is affecting the trust in public institutions, actually ends up corroding democracy.
Yes.
It erodes the possibility for us to have that type of debate that strengthens democracy.
Yes, I'm concerned about that, yes.
So healthy public debate being affected by deliberate online falsehoods is a concern that you would share.
Yes.
Would you agree then that if we don't stop the spread of deliberate online falsehood, actually it makes it more difficult to discuss key socio-political issues effectively?
Yes, I think we must put it out that there are mechanisms to stop these things in their tracks so that we can have healthy democratic deliberation. But what we do must not then undermine that ultimate goal as well. So the cure cannot be worse than the disease.
I wonder, Dr. Koh, if you're aware of the submission made by Dr. Gillian and her
Yes.
discussion today about,
Yes.
and one of the points, one of the many points that she made with respect to free speech and
Yes.
how free speech comes in different forms and speech comes in different forms. That you know, the truth of facts, there are opinions, and then there's speech which is deliberate and it's false, and that not all speech therefore can and should be protected in the same way. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I
general-
would agree
general
with
statement?
that. Yes.
That there are attempts to use the rubric of free speech, the mantle of free speech, really to disguise what are fairly malicious attempts to manipulate perception and information. Would you agree with that?
From what we've read about the US election and the Russian allegations of Russian interference, they purposely take advantage of those features of being a democracy in order to stir the pot and achieve their own malicious intent. So that's what we've read, and that's the suggestion.
But do you
And-
agree with that?
And I would agree that that's certainly something that we are vulnerable to.
So you would agree with the proposition that steps taken which on the face of it might have an impact on free speech are not automatically anathema to what we're trying to achieve, which is an informed and useful, productive public debate?
Yes, I agree with that.
That there are some types of hate speech, issues to do with our fundamental values around race and religion and social harmony, which perhaps need to be constrained in order to create safer spaces?
Yes, we must do all that we can do to secure safe space and facilitate rich, truthful debate based on people's sort of best guess, best ability to bring, you know, what they judge as their best facts and figures and data. We have to do that. But Professor Teo also left out the issue of hate speech. She felt that that's yet a different category, and we have to deal with that differently. But I would accept that there will be occasions when there's online material that's put out, different types of information, which seeks to sow discord, yes, and would sound like hate speech, yes. In fact, one of the examples that I've put in my submission relates to that, yes.
So there's a quote that she has, Dr. Teo has in her submission, quoting Lord Hobhouse, but if I just pull out the relevant statement, there is no human right to disseminate information that is not true. No public interest is served by publishing or communicating misinformation. I'm sure you can readily agree with that statement, that a deliberate online falsehood serves no good purpose by being allowed to be spread further or perpetuated.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Okay. If I look to your submission now, Dr. Koh,
Yes.
would you agree that today's laws, today's legal framework do not cover all the issues adequately? That the status quo is something that we need to deal with and change and address?
Well, first in my submission, I recognize that there's a very broad and comprehensive framework to manage speech that can be construed as sowing discord, can put our public order in peril, our social cohesion in peril. Am I qualified to judge whether it's adequate? I think we've heard another witness, Professor Goh Yihan, say that there are gaps. It is patchy. In fact, my own colleague, Dr. Carol Soon, recommended that some things be boosted in terms of the framework that exists. And the primary one being that perhaps there should be, in the Broadcasting Act, for instance, a way in which you broaden the concept of the internet service provider so that you cover maybe not what platform, but what material, regardless of the platform, in order to deal with DOFs or any other kind of speech that puts our national security and public order in peril. So I would accept that perhaps there would be areas in which things can improve. On the other hand, I did not want to deal with that in my submission because I wanted to focus on what I think is new and needs to be
I understand.
introduced.
And in your submission, you focused very much on what happens around elections.
Yes.
Perhaps, actually, that's the next place we would like to go to. You've suggested that all these things do need to be dealt with during elections.
Yes.
But could I put it to you that the people that we're dealing with who want to spread deliberate online falsehoods for the purposes of undermining whether it's our social cohesion, our national security, or to influence political or financial outcomes, are not constraining themselves to the time after nomination day is announced, that this is something that is happening all the time. And so if we are going to act upon this, we need to do so all the time rather than waiting for elections?
Well, yes, I suppose, given how I responded earlier, I would accept that there can be ongoing campaigns. But again, please accept that I'm not an expert and been through thoroughly all the rules that exist. I would say that there is so much out there already that seeks to curb foreign interference, whether it's through which societies we register, through the political donations bill, and so on and so forth. Then there are also many provisions from the Broadcasting Act to Sedition Act, where speech or material that seeks to sow discord is also dealt with on an ongoing basis. So, and then again, we can also see that these are used and have been used in the past and applied even faster and faster with time. So, of course, I would remember the case of the three bloggers in 2005, who had very sort of explosive views about a certain religious community, and they were dealt with in a period of 3 months. But in 2013, we had a cartoonist suggest a very unsavory idea about how the government manages a certain community. And that was dealt with under the Sedition Act in 23 days. The Istana website was hacked in 2013, and that was dealt with in 2 days.
Dr. Koh,
So you pulled it
Dr. Koh,
down really quick.
Can
So
I sort of interrupt?
yes, of course. I'm not saying that's comprehensive and adequate, but I'm saying it exists.
No, that's
Yeah.
why I think it's good that we have a framework here. To be fair to you, I think you accepted that, look, you are not the expert in this field. It will be clearer for us if we understand exactly where the discussion is situated.
Yes.
We have had at least 2 law professors who have come to us to say there are gaps. I don't think you disagree with that, no? Right. Correct?
Correct? I don't disagree with
Right.
that.
So let me
Yes.
come to it. So we need to be very clear. I think you listened to Dr. Carol Soon. The point I made to her was there are gaps. How we deal with the gaps, whether it's through changing existing legislation, through new legislation, those are really matters for lawyers. You're not the best expert for that, correct?
Right.
Right. So really, I think it'll be more productive for us to focus on the other areas of your evidence, because you can take it, we are aware of the existing legislation. So were the law professors.
Yeah.
We are all aware. We know of the past cases. The fact is, there is clear evidence that there are gaps and that the current legislation does not allow us to deal with the modern virality of DOFs in the way that they need to be dealt with. So that's one whole legal area which I don't think you are the best person to go into. But I mean, based on your own admission,
Correct.
that's right.
But let me make the general point that
Yeah.
I think
So-
that
sorry, I
nor
haven't
would I
finished yet.
support,
I
nor
haven't
would
finished
I.
yet. I haven't finished yet.
Okay.
So it's not so much asking you for because it's a question of assisting the committee. You probably aren't in the best position to assist the committee on what sort of amendments to the law, what sort of laws should we be looking at. At best, you can give us some general ideas. It should be quick, it should be fast, it should be effective, it should probably give a right of response, or it may perhaps, it must accord in the broad principles of rule of law. I mean, those are the sorts of things that I think people can assist us on. But I don't think you are in a position to say, look, you have this legislation, you have this legislation, you have this legislation, and therefore you are in a good position, and you don't need, or you do need, or if you do need, you need to do this sort of amendments. So that's what I wanted to be clear about, because that's what I understood you to be saying.
Yes, it is, but I'd like to just explain why I wasn't sort of going to, I hadn't in my submission spent a lot of time on that.
That's understandable.
Yes, but the general point is that I think in order to deal with what I perceive to be new about
Yes.
the threats,
Yes.
then they are really about foreign interference and during a time when all citizens are making consequential political decisions. But on an ongoing basis, the impression is that there are tools, in spite of what the good Professor Goh said, there are already a lot of tools which seem to be very efficiently mobilized in order to deal with the ongoing threat. So that's all I wanted to say. So therefore, yes, I'll leave it to the good professors and your good self to highlight how it's entirely not adequate. But I'm just trying to explain why I don't
Understand.
see the need to create revolutionary change in that regard, but in why I want to suggest something new which is quite harsh, possibly, but during an election period.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Koh. We're okay with that?
Said my piece. Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you. So, why should we limit ourselves to elections? I understand that your submission you have limited yourself
Yeah.
to elections, but if I can understand where you are over the last exchange that you had with the Minister, you are prepared to accept that there's much more to this than the submission that the focus of your submission, which is the foreign interference in the elections. Would I be right to say that?
Yes, yes.
And so, for
Yes.
example, that if we deal with issues around race and religion and national security outside of the election period, where these are affected by deliberate online falsehoods, you could see that those were worthy things to do and worth doing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
If I could ask you about some of the comments in your submission, I just want to be a bit clear about your view on the foreign influence. If I could draw your attention to your paragraph, let me just see where it is. Your paragraph 27, for example,
Okay?
where you are suggesting that there may be some merit to allowing Singaporeans to have access to or consume news related to the elections from outside of Singapore. Similarly, in your paragraph 25, and several other places. Can I just have a sort of clear understanding about what your view is with respect to foreign influence over our elections? I mean, it could be a very clear stance that there should be no foreign influence over our electoral process. And if that's so, then that would be good to have that clarity. That, But whereas some of your paragraphs suggest that provided it doesn't meet a certain test of harm, that if it doesn't meet some maliciousness, that it's okay for foreign interference to play a part in our electoral process. And I'm not sure that is actually your position. Perhaps you can clarify for us.
No, I think my position is that voters during an election period should know that they are consuming material that's come from a foreign source, and there should be no compromise about that. They should be informed about what they're reading, and if we're talking about an adversary that's trying to stir the pot, then that communication will be necessarily covert. Then the question is, why is it that I did not suggest a clear takedown if the material is from a foreign source? I think how curious, right? You must be wondering. So is that possible or not? I think it's back to Teo Lian's point, and I think that's what I'm trying to achieve as well. It's a balance. So if you take down, it makes it even more attractive to read. People will be looking for it, and in the internet age, that's not entirely foolproof. If you leave it, but you actually put out an advisory and say, excuse me, this is actually generated by a foreign source, still checking which one it is, but the provenance is not local. You are, in not taking it down, but prohibiting further circulation, you're also allowing third parties, you're allowing citizens, those who do care enough, to also engage in that debate and dialogue. So where's the balance? The balance is, as Teo Lian has described, there is the negative liberty, which is you're trying to be very careful about how you regulate speech, especially under the circumstance of the election.
But Dr.
But
Koh,
there's the positive liberty, which is you've got to also allow people to decide for themselves in an election.
But so, Dr. Koh, just specifically, a deliberate online falsehood in an attempt to influence our local electoral process from a foreign entity, is there any reason why that should be allowed to be part of the discourse?
It should be engaged with. It should be taken on. It should be, first we should recognize that it is foreign. Then in the process, first you have to establish the provenance.
No,
Then you have to establish the falsehood. And then you have to say, we stop play here and we have to take it on. But
would we not then run the risk of providing further reach and impact and significance to what we know is a deliberate online falsehood from overseas?
And by which time a lot of time would have lapsed anyway. When you saw the evidence, you know that, there was some purpose in taking you through Dr. Soon's evidence,
Sure.
and also what happened in the United States and elsewhere. So everything you now say seems to be going against the weight of evidence the committee has heard. I mean, what sane or sensible or civilized purpose is there in, say, allowing a statement in Indonesia prior to the elections that President Jokowi and his family are Christian? What purpose do you think is served by that?
well, there would be others that declare that he is not.
And no,
There would be third parties
sorry, Dr.
to-
Koh, I'm
yeah.
asking you what
It's a
purpose
fact.
is
Yes,
served?
if it's a fact, yeah.
Well, he's not a
Right.
Christian.
Right.
So what purpose is served by allowing people to put out that falsehood in order to inflame opinion? Is there any purpose that's served?
That
Whether
the
in
rest
elections?
of the right-thinking citizens would disagree with that, and they would not just take.
But why do you
states-
believe that? The evidence shows you that a significant number of people could well end up believing it.
But there would be hopefully enough people also to push back.
But there is no evidence to that effect.
course.
The evidence is to the contrary.
Right. Of course, if
And,
we're talking about a
But also,
straightforward,
we haven't had an answer to my original question, which is what purpose is served, either in terms of the theory of free speech or the theory of marketplace of ideas, in allowing an absolute and utter falsehood to circulate
Yeah.
when you know that it's more likely to be believed, at least by a section of the people, just like a section of the Americans believed that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring, or that she was selling arms to ISIS, or that President Obama was a Muslim. And deliberate falsehoods which targeted President Obama's original 2012 supporters not to vote for Mrs. Clinton. So I'm struggling to understand what purpose do you think, a few questions, what purpose do you think will be served? And second, by reference to, we took you through Dr. Theo Lian's points, marketplace of ideas. Free speech has got it can be true, it can be opinions, it can be misinterpretations, it can be absolute falsehood. Speech is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And if that is so, what ends are you achieving by allowing absolute falsehoods targeted at the gut to circulate, to try and influence people when it actually contradicts the very fundamentals of democracy and corrodes democracy? That's the first question. The second question is, particularly when you know that such speech actually is very difficult to push back against. All the evidence that we have put before you shows that. So maybe you can help the committee.
yeah,
Thank you.
I'm happy to. Thank you. Well, first off, before I answer the two questions, I think when you frame the question as an absolute clear data point that is completely false,
Yes.
then I think that framed that way, there is no purpose in a clear, deliberate falsehood circulating for democracy.
Good. Let me assure
so that
you
is,
that is what we are dealing with.
yes,
So let's just stick to that. Deliberate falsehoods, as to whether it is clear or not clear, there's got to be some way of ascertaining
which
it.
is my point.
Well,
which
we'll
is
come
what
to
I was
that.
coming to, sir,
Yeah.
if you allow me. Yeah,
So
I
we are
think that
agreed on
there
the
is a
first point.
process of establishing sometimes
Right.
whether there's a half-truth or whatever. It still takes time.
Right.
That's the first point. The second point is that sometimes these are not just data points, but they are also opinion. And therefore,
No, we are not
when
dealing with opinions. So,
opinion that is layered onto
well,
some
no,
data.
let's be clear. This is where a lot of confusion arises.
Right.
We are not talking about opinions in this committee.
Mm-hmm.
We are dealing with deliberate falsehoods. Opinions can be based on falsehoods. And then there's got to be a way of identifying those falsehoods and dealing with them.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of clarity of discussion,
Yes.
let's not get to opinions. People are entitled to their opinions, how unreasonable they are. We are only dealing with falsehoods.
Yes. But
And
even
when we-
then, there is a period of time to establish.
Well,
right.
you see, this is where, because you're not lawyer, you are at a slight disadvantage. There are ways of dealing with that. Leave that to us in terms of, we'll get the experts to work with us on the process. So the question is more a policy one for you. If we can identify, or we can find a way of identifying falsehoods, and we've got to obviously deal with the virality in the digital age and the speed, and those are all process issues, which we'll have to deal with. So let's not get that mixed up here.
Sure.
As long as you assume that we can deal with those issues in some way, in some acceptable way, then I think we are at item in saying that the deliberate online falsehoods have no place in the kind of discussions we are talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the key point is also that there are citizens who will then need to be convinced in their hearts and minds, firstly, that it's false, and therefore you do want to allow some space for people to make their minds up on that as well. You declare that it is false, but people still will have to discuss and absorb it. Given how difficult it is, we don't want to neglect that process of persuasion and convincing. I say it's false, but I still need to persuade you it's false. These are the different steps. And therefore, all I'm saying is we have to allow for a process where there is that deliberation as well.
I want to understand this a little bit more.
Right.
Maybe we can put up the cartoon that we have been showing to the others.
Of course. And let's have a look.
Yes.
I'm happy to.
This was a cartoon that has been put up and Twitter refused to take it off. You see a white woman, half naked, being surrounded by obviously Muslim-looking figures. Her child is being murdered by one of them. The word diversity is put up. Do you honestly believe that we should allow circulation of this? And as you say, we should go and fight for the hearts and minds of people, but after allowing this to circulate?
No, I think this is one example where it's clear-cut.
So this is where I think we are running into definitional problems. By the way, Twitter thought that this was not clear-cut. It didn't offend their policies. In Singapore, it will.
Yes.
And I think as a sensible person, you will agree it will.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Would you agree that a suggestion that President Obama is a Muslim is a clear-cut example?
Yes.
Right. Would you agree that the suggestion that Mrs. Clinton is selling arms to ISIS is a clear-cut example?
Yes.
Would you agree that the suggestion that Mrs. Clinton is running a pedophile ring out of a pizza restaurant is such an absurd suggestion that it's a clear-cut example as well?
She will have to prove it. She will have to set it out
so
clearly.
you will
It will
allow
take time.
that to circulate?
And she will have to engage with that.
Right.
Yes.
So I think
But you
where
can
we
see
are-
in my examples in the submissions, for instance,
No, sorry, let
are
me
you saying
finish.
that,
Let me finish.
okay?
So I think I understand where you're coming from. In your mind, there are some examples which are clear-cut, where we don't need to engage, it just has got to be taken down.
Yes.
And this is one such example. The ISIS example is another. President Jokowi being Christian is another. And you can imagine there are many such examples.
Yes.
But you have some questions as to where that line is drawn. But I think in your earlier evidence, you are quite good enough to agree that it can be drawn in terms of clear factual falsehoods.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
I think that's good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As there are no further questions, Dr. Gillian Koh, thank you very much for being here and spending time with us. We'll send you a transcript of today's proceedings. If there's any corrections to be made, please make the corrections and send it back to us. Right?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you,
Thank you very
committee.
much.
Thank you, Dr. Koh.
Thank you.
Sure. We can send it to you.
Yeah, basically just that. Shall I tell the clerk?
Okay. We're finished with the evidence taking for witnesses scheduled for today. Are there any other matters? Okay, if none, I adjourn the proceedings till Tuesday, 27th of March, 2018 at 10 a.m. Thank you. Yeah. You want to ask him? Yeah, sure.
I'll let the